Hello guys, this is Luca again. Isn't it unfamiliar to you guys? I'm not in China anymore. I'm at Tokyo's International Airport. You know where I'm going? I'm going to New York. That's where my girlfriend lives. And I applied for this job in the US for her. So now I'm meeting her. I'm really excited. I'm about to cry. I'm trying to hold back my tears. Yes, I'm about to board the plane. Wish me good luck, guys. See you in New York.
All right, so today I want to tell you about this love story. And look, I get it. Love stories might not be everyone's thing, but bear with me on this one because it's pretty wild. So there's this guy, Luca. He's from Hebei, China. He's an English teacher, stable job, normal life. And in 2024, he does something that, honestly, everyone around him thought was insane. He quits his job, says goodbye to his family and friends, packs his bags, and gets on a plane to the United States. All to meet a girl he'd never seen in person. A girl he'd only met online. An American girl named Kim. What started as just language practice, he wanted to improve his English, she wanted to learn some Chinese. It turned into something real. And Kim? She wasn't just sitting around waiting for her Prince Charming or whatever. She actually left New York, the city where she grew up, and moved to a completely different place to be with Luca. And eventually, she's planning to move all the way to China with him. But here's what really stands out about their story. Kim was the one who popped the question. Yeah, she asked him to marry her. And look, in a lot of cultures, definitely in Luca's, it's not the norm. It's usually the guy on one knee, right? So anyway, let me walk you through how these two actually ended up together because it's quite a journey. So Luca, he was originally an English teacher back in China, and after work, he'd always be on these language learning apps, just trying to practice his speaking, improve his English. And on the other side of the world, in New York, there's Kim. She's working at a clothing store, Hispanic background, and she downloaded the same app because, well, she wanted to learn languages too. And somehow, these two people with the exact same goal just happened to match up in this virtual world.
At that moment, I was an English teacher, but I didn't think my English was perfect. So I kept practicing. I was using that app as a language learning tool, and she was learning Korean.
Trying to.
That's what she said, but I don't believe it.
Now here's the thing. The time difference? It actually worked out perfectly for them. When it was nighttime for Luca in China, it was morning for Kim in the US. So she'd be at the store, maybe not super busy, and she'd chat with this really enthusiastic, talkative Chinese guy. They started with little language learning tips, then moved on to talking about their daily lives, cultural differences, funny stories. And then eventually, they started sharing their dreams, the things they really wanted to do with their lives. 3 months of talking every single day, and these two hearts that were originally, half a world apart, they just kept getting closer and closer. And finally one day, Luca worked up the courage to tell her how he felt. And Kim, on the other end of that call, she barely hesitated. She said yes. After they officially got together, they were on the phone constantly, every single day. But as you can imagine, after a while, that just wasn't enough anymore. They wanted to see each other face to face, and finally, just be able to hold each other. So Luca, he went online and started looking through every single guide he could find. And eventually, he discovered this work and travel program. December 2024, really early one morning, before the sun even comes up, Luca heads out. He specifically wore a hoodie with San Francisco on it, hoping it would bring him good luck or something. And he's clutching all these visa documents in his hand. Documents he'd organized and reorganized probably 100 times. He grabs a bike share, starts pedaling toward the US Embassy. And when he gets there, there's already this long line of people waiting outside. The next few hours feel like forever, like every minute just dragging on and on. Until finally, he walks out of that embassy, holding his passport with the visa stamp in it. And that's when it hit him. This is actually happening. He turns to the camera, and his voice is shaking, literally shaking, and he says, "I got the visa. I can buy the plane ticket now." 9 months of waiting, 9 months of stress and uncertainty, and finally, he had his answer. When Luca was at the Tokyo airport, in the transit lounge waiting for his connecting flight, he recorded this video message.
And I applied for this job in the US for her. So now I'm meeting her. I'm really excited. I'm about to cry. I'm trying to hold back my tears. About to board the plane. Wish me good luck, guys. See you in New York.
But when the plane finally landed in New York, things didn't go exactly as planned. Kim doesn't show up at the airport. She's sick. So Luca's just standing there in this massive airport terminal, people rushing past him everywhere. And he's worried, he's anxious. His phone is basically burning in his hand because he's gripping it so tight. 10 minutes later, Kim sends him a message saying she's on her way. An hour after that, the person he'd seen on his screen countless times finally appears right there in front of him, in real life.
Hello guys, this is Luca.
And Kim.
Mama.
Now, that first face-to-face meeting, it was awkward. Like, really awkward. Kim was super shy, kept touching her head, looking away, wouldn't make eye contact with him at all. So Luca, he quickly pulls out these gifts he'd been carrying around. A silver ring he'd made himself in Laos, a pearl necklace he'd strung by hand, and this silver manta ray necklace he'd bought in the Maldives. All these little tokens that meant something, you know? And he'd carefully carried them all the way to New York. But here's the thing. Their time together was incredibly short. Because the work program Luca had applied for was in Charlottesville, Virginia. So they only had 48 hours together. That's it. 48 hours. In those 48 hours, Kim took Luca all over New York. They rode the subway, walked across the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge, saw the Statue of Liberty, went to Wall Street and Trinity Church. When they got to Flushing, Luca couldn't help but laugh. Chinese signs everywhere, the smell of Chinese restaurants in the air. It instantly made him feel like he was back home. Warm, but also kind of bittersweet, you know? And then the moment they'd both been dreading came. Time to say goodbye. Kim looked at her boyfriend, this guy she'd just met in person, and she insisted on taking him all the way to Charlottesville. So they got on a train together. Neither of them had a car, so the train was their only option. And then Kim, she turned around and took another 7-hour train ride back to New York, all by herself. Luca watched her walk away, and honestly, he didn't know what to feel. It was just a lot. So after that, Luca started his life working alone in Charlottesville. In the mornings, he'd be riding this little electric scooter through the streets, wind blowing, feeling pretty fresh. He'd get to the restaurant, put on his clean work uniform, turn on some upbeat country music, and start his day. He'd be checking the cash register, brewing coffee and tea, organizing the liquor cabinet. But the thing is, he hadn't quite mastered how to make cocktails yet. So before they'd open, he'd have the recipe book out, trying to cram, last-minute studying. And honestly, there were these little moments of kindness that really warmed his heart. Like, a customer would just ask for a cup of ice, and after he'd hand it to them, they'd just give him $2 as a tip. Another customer would see him struggling to carry 3 beers at once, and they'd just hand him $10. Even for something as simple as grabbing a can of Coke, someone would slip him $1. By the end of the day, these small gestures made him feel pretty good about the job. But when he'd ride that little scooter back to his empty apartment, take off his uniform, wash off the exhaustion, Kim's face would just pop into his head. And it would kind of overshadow the happiness of making money, Just left him feeling lonely. The good thing was, Kim was texting him every single day, and at night they'd always video chat.
Why did you change your job?
So our relationship benefited, right, from the store being empty and me having the opportunity to talk more. But the store did not benefit.
A few months later, Kim made a really important decision. She was going to move to Charlottesville to live with Luca. And she found a new job there too. She told Luca, "I know you're working 16 hours a day. That's way too much. I want to come help you, take some of that pressure off so you can save more money." When Luca heard that, man, what do you even say to something like that? He was completely floored. Now, before Kim could start her new job, she needed to pass a drug screening, standard pre-employment thing. But here's the problem. They didn't have a car, and they lived in kind of a remote area. Couldn't get an Uber or anything. So they had no choice but to ask their coworker, Anna, for help. And Anna, she was so generous about it. She absolutely refused to take any money and just drove them there and back, no questions asked. To meet someone that kind in a foreign country, Luca was really touched by that. So to prepare for Kim's arrival, Luca moved out of the company dorm. He rode his bike around looking at 4 different apartments and finally picked this one-bedroom place. Rent was $1,300 a month, plus electricity and internet. That was basically half his monthly salary. But Kim said she'd transfer half the rent to him every month. They'd split it together. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, nothing. But to them, as long as they had each other, that place was home. The day Kim took the train in, Luca had already told all his coworkers the good news, and everyone was so happy for him. He even bought a bouquet of flowers and waited anxiously at the train station. And when he saw Kim step off that train, Luca felt like all the hard work, all the waiting, it was all worth it. When they got back to the apartment, Kim saw the dinner Luca had prepared, looked around at the empty room, and her eyes just started tearing up. She hugged Luca and said, "This is perfect. We don't have anything, but having you here is enough." That moment, honestly, that was everything. So once they actually started living together, the cultural differences really started showing up, especially in the kitchen. Luca's got this authentic Chinese palate, and Kim grew up on American food. When she first heard pork, she'd just shake her head. She'd almost never eaten it, just instinctively rejected it. One time, Luca made this Chinese burger, rujiamo. After tasting, she kept saying how good it was. And from that moment on, she wasn't just okay with pork, she fell in love with all kinds of pork dishes. So Luca just started teaching her how to cook. He taught her how to make pork ribs stewed with potato noodles. And Kim, she especially loved the potatoes and those glass noodles in it. Every time she looked at what she'd made, she'd be so proud, like a kid showing off their artwork, you know? Now, Kim wasn't just sitting back either. She showed Luca this traditional American Thanksgiving dish, roast turkey. She was so comfortable making it, clearly something she'd done many times before. This huge turkey, like a proper Thanksgiving-sized bird, way more than the two of them could finish. So they had plenty of leftovers to share with people who didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving. They both knew what it felt like to be far from home, so they wanted to share that warmth with others who needed it. Just passing on that kindness.
You know, today is a day where it doesn't matter if there's a turkey in front of you or not. It's just a day to enjoy the people around you and appreciate the things that you have and the relationships you have. And I just want to say thank you for both, and I appreciate you.
Slowly, they developed this habit of clinking their bowls before every meal. Didn't matter if it was Chinese food or Western food. Later, Kim even learned how to make Vietnamese spring rolls with Luca. Their meals were so rich and warm every single day. Kim found a job not far from where they lived. She had to leave really early for work, so Luca would wake up early every morning to make her breakfast and pack it for her. He noticed she really loved instant noodles, so he'd often pack Korean instant noodles for her. Watching her eat with that satisfied look on her face, Luca just felt so happy inside. But even in all this happiness, there was this one concern hanging over them. Luca's visa was only good for 1 year. One time, Luca couldn't help but ask Kim if her job could work in China. Kim went quiet for a second, then softly said no. because she worked for an American company. That answer made them both go silent for a moment. The future. There were still a lot of things they needed to figure out. But at least for now, they were cherishing every moment they had together. So, as Christmas got closer, Luca and Kim were planning to go back to New York for the holidays. But because of some family issues, they had to cancel. So they agreed, okay, we're just not doing Christmas this year. But Luca knew something. He knew Kim had been looking forward to this holiday for months. He didn't want to disappoint her. So he told a little white lie. On Christmas Eve, Luca pulled out the Christmas gift he'd secretly prepared, a pair of headphones. He remembered Kim had mentioned once that she'd accidentally washed her AirPods and hadn't gotten around to buying new ones. So he made a mental note of it. He hid the gift on top of the Christmas tree, planning to see when Kim would discover the surprise. Now Kim, she'd actually sensed something was up. She'd been secretly watching his every move around the house, but she couldn't figure out what Luca was planning. When she finally found the gift the next day, she hugged Luca with tears in her eyes. She was so moved.
You got me something.
Yeah.
I knew you were gonna lie. I should have got. Oh God. Why'd you do that?
Why aren't you happy?
Because I feel bad.
It's okay, Lola.
Mama, no!
One day, Kim came back from her parents' house. She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter, handing it to Luca. Luca opened it, confused at first, and as he kept reading, he got more and more shocked. This was a proposal letter. Kim was proposing to him. In China, it's always been the guy who proposes to the girl. Luca had never imagined that Kim would propose to him first. Inside the letter, there was this little hand-drawn map with China and the US marked on it, connected by a red line. And the letter said, "From the moment I first heard your voice, during a time when my world felt so dark, I could never imagine such light. My soul felt drawn to you before my mind even understood why. I need you to know with every word in this letter that you are the most beautiful soul I have ever known, inside and out. I fall in love with you every single day and will continue to do so for the rest of my life. My home, my peace, my forever is and always will be you." When Luca finished reading, he couldn't even speak. He was so moved. Then he quickly snapped out of it, went to his drawer, and pulled out that silver ring he'd made in Laos. He gently slipped it onto Kim's finger and softly asked, "Will you marry me?" Kim, tears in her eyes, looked at Luca and nodded hard. They were engaged. Later, Luca said he'd actually thought about proposing too, but figured he'd have to wait another 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 years. He never expected Kim to be so brave. And he also said he'd definitely give Kim a proper proposal ceremony in the future. Not long after they got engaged, they started talking about marriage-related topics. And Luca remembered this Chinese tradition called bride price, or chai li. It's where the groom's family gives the bride's family money before the wedding, kind of like a dowry, but reversed. And honestly, it puts a lot of financial pressure on Chinese men. So Luca, he curiously brought it up with Kim. He asked if, in her culture, there'd be a similar expectation. Kim kind of froze for a second, like she didn't quite understand the custom. Then she answered really directly and honestly. She'd never thought about wanting any bride price. As long as they could live a good life together, that was enough for her. That straightforwardness, that generosity, later on, it made a lot of their followers really respect her. People were saying Luca had found someone who truly understood what matters. As for the wedding, Kim wanted both families to meet, so it might take a year or two to prepare everything. And they were both willing to wait. They had time.
I don't really think of the material things when I was doing that. I just think of you're the person. There's just no other person that I would want to have a life with.
Nothing else matters.
Yeah, everything else is just simple. We figured out on.
So now, Luca and Kim have finally made this really important decision. They're going back to China to start a completely new chapter of their lives. For this, Kim applied for a Chinese visa for the first time. On the way to the consulate, she was gripping those documents so tight her fingertips were cold. She kept asking Luca, "What if there's a problem? What if the interviewer asks really hard questions?" You could just see how nervous she was. Luckily, the process went way smoother than she expected. When she got her passport back with the visa stamped in it, Kim let out this huge sigh of relief, and her eyes were just full of anticipation for the future. Before they left, they were invited to Luca's coworker, Johanna's house for a farewell dinner. She was actually from El Salvador. So they're sitting at the table, and Johanna's family member is in the kitchen making these traditional dishes from back home. And Luca's watching her cook, and suddenly, she just sticks her hand directly into this boiling pot to stir the food. Like, no hesitation, completely natural. And Luca's just sitting there, jaw dropped, thinking, wait, doesn't that hurt? Later, he found out it's actually a traditional cooking method. Her hands were just used to it from doing it her whole life. Johanna's warmth really got to him, you know? Being able to meet people that kind and welcoming in a foreign country, Luca felt really lucky. So he invited Johanna and her family to come to China for their wedding in the future, and they happily agreed. Now, very few people know this, but Kim, this girl who seems so sunny and cheerful, she's actually struggled with depression because of some things in her past. And when she met Luca, those struggles didn't just vanish. But having him there, supporting her through it all, it made a real difference. She doesn't have to face those hard days alone anymore. So that's their story. Their journey's really just starting. There'll probably be more challenges down the road, but for now, they're heading back to China together to see what happens next. And honestly, if two people can meet on a language app, fall in love across an ocean, and end up building a life together, maybe distance isn't really the obstacle we think it is. That's today's story. If this story touched you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'll see you in the next episode.